One of the ways to install Linux is inside a virtual machine. Virtual machines are little containers that hold an operating system and run it within another operating system. This way of installing Linux is great if you're learning or testing, or either can't or don't want to modify your system's hard drive and boot setup. It's a good place to start because there's absolutely no risk of overwriting or harming your current operating system or data. You can even take the virtual machine with you to different computers on an external hard drive. However, when running as a virtual machine, your Linux installation won't have access to all of your computer's resources. You'll be sharing RAM and graphics memory, and it will have to compete with the native or host operating system for access to disks and hardware resources. This is in no way a bad thing, though. It basically boils down to this. If you need to use Linux to do resource-intensive things like working with video or large datasets, a virtual environment probably isn't the best choice. But for most uses, especially for getting your feet wet with a new operating system, it's just fine. I'll show you how to set up a virtual machine using VirtualBox, a free application available from Oracle. You could also use commercial software like VMware or Parallels, and the process will be just about the same. But I'm using VirtualBox because it's free, and it's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux, so it's just about as accessible as can be. VirtualBox is available from virtualbox.org. To find the installer for your system, click the big blue button, and then choose the platform package for your system. I've already downloaded and installed it on my system. Depending what operating system you're using, the software will look a little bit different. Go ahead and go through the installation process and open up the application. If you want to learn more about the VirtualBox software itself, be sure to check out my course, Learning VirtualBox. With the VirtualBox Manager open, I'll click on New, and I'll give my virtual machine a name. I'll call it Ubuntu 18.04 Desktop. And since I used the word Ubuntu, VirtualBox has changed the type and version of the VM down here automatically for me. I'll click Next. On this screen, I'll decide how much RAM to give my virtual machine. More RAM means more programs can be open at the same time and run well. For trying out Linux, I'd recommend about 2 GB or 2048 MB. You'll want to stay within this green area under the slider bar to make sure that your host computer still has enough RAM to run well, or everything will get annoying and slow. I'll click Next. And now I'll choose to create a virtual hard disk. I'll choose VDI and click Next. Then I'm presented with the choice whether to grow the virtual machine's disk dynamically, that is, the file on my host computer gets bigger as the virtual machine's disk fills up, or to do a fixed size, which makes a file of whatever size I choose to make the hard drive and sets that space aside from the very beginning. I like to make a dynamic file since I don't want to take up all of this space on my host system when it's going to be full of nothing for a long time. I'll click Next. Now I have the opportunity to name the hard drive file. I'll just leave it set to whatever the program suggests. I will change the size to 100 GB though. Remember, this space isn't being taken up yet. This is a good time to think about whether you want to move the virtual machine around on a hard drive or flash disk. Make sure the hard drive file will fit on that device. Another thing to consider here is whether you're going to back up your virtual machine file. VirtualBox puts a folder inside your user folder on the host machine which contains the virtual machine. And that's usually within the scope of automatic backups. I'll click Create. At this point, we have a container for the Linux installation, but no Linux yet. Let's fix that. I need to install the operating system from the ISO disk image I downloaded, and to do that, I'll connect the ISO to the virtual machine as a virtual CD drive. I'll click on my virtual machine and choose Settings, go to Storage, and under the IDE controller, I'll click the empty slot. Then over here on the right, I'll click the little CD icon and go to Choose Virtual Optical Disk File. I'll navigate to my Downloads folder and select the ISO image, and then I'll click Open. I'll click OK. And back on the listing of my virtual machines, I'll choose mine and click Start. To get rid of these messages at the top, I'll click the crossed out comment bubble. And I'll maximize the window. The installer starts up after a few moments and gives me the option to try Ubuntu or to install Ubuntu. I'll click Install Ubuntu. The next screen asks me to choose the keyboard for my language. This is set correctly for me to US English, so I'll click Continue. The next screen asks if I want to perform a normal installation or a minimal installation. A normal installation comes with a web browser, some utilities, some Office software, some games, and media players. A minimal installation only comes with basic utilities and a web browser. For this course, I'll choose normal installation because I want to show you some of the software that comes with Ubuntu. I'm also given the option to download updates while installing Ubuntu. In order to save time during the installation process, I'll uncheck that. I'm also given the option to install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware. Here in my virtual machine, I don't need to do that, so I'll leave that unchecked. Then I'll click Continue. Now I'll choose to erase the whole virtual disk and install Ubuntu. There's no risk to your data at this point. All of this erasing is happening within the virtual hard drive file we created earlier. You can choose to encrypt the volume if you'd like. If you do, it'll ask for a password whenever the system boots before you log in. For testing out Linux in a virtual environment, this is probably overkill, as is the next option, which makes it easier to increase the size of the boot drive later on. I'll leave them unchecked, and I'll click Install Now. I'll click Continue to confirm the changes, and I'll make sure that my time zone is set correctly. Then I'll click Continue. Here I can set my username, my computer's name, and a password. I'll leave this set to ask me for my password when I log in, but in a testing environment, you could choose to skip that. I'll click Continue. You'll see a couple of informational slides during the process, which takes a few minutes. But through the miracle of movie magic, let's fast forward to the end. Now, with the installation complete, I need to restart the virtual machine so it can boot up into the new install. You may be prompted to hit Enter to restart the machine. And here's my Ubuntu login screen. I'll click my username, and I'll type in my password to log in. I want to point your attention to the bottom right corner of the VirtualBox window. On my screen, it has a green arrow and it says Right Control. If you're using a Mac, it may say Left Command. This is what's referred to in VirtualBox as the host key. VirtualBox uses the host key to do some of the things that it does. For example, I need to use that for some commands, like if I go full screen. On Windows here, I press the right Control and F. Then I'll click Switch. To exit this mode, you'll need to hit the host key and F again. If you're following along with me in a virtual machine, you're ready to go, and you can skip to the next chapter. But if you want to see how to install Ubuntu natively on a computer, I'll do that later in this chapter.